Hello, Pikeview High School students, and welcome to this music theory lesson. I'm going to go over just a few things today and hopefully make this a lot clearer for you. So, today we're going to be talking about the staff, and of course, feel free to write down notes if that helps you, or to pause this video whenever you need extra help. But of course, hopefully you understand everything. I'm going to try to go through a good bit today. So we're talking about the staff, notes, and pitches. Alright, so that's the title of our lesson. So music is communicated in a very specific way, and a way that's pretty much the same all across the world. At least westernized music, so some of the newer stuff may be communicated differently, but most music at least is communicated this way. To understand how to read music and how to recreate music, we use a thing called the staff. Now, the staff looks kind of like this. It's made up of 5 lines. Five lines, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then when we draw those, it also creates 4 spaces, right? So space, space here, space, space, space. 5 lines and 4 spaces. Now, each of those different lines and spaces, in order to understand them and to use them in a way that makes sense to everyone, at least when we're learning, is to number them. And we always number them from the very bottom to the very top. So line number 1 is this one here. Line number 2 is the second line going up. Line number 3 is here. Line number 4, and then line number 5. All right, and then the same thing for the spaces on the staff, right? Remember, this thing here is called a staff, right? S-T-A-F-F. The thing we're writing on, the 5 lines and 4 spaces, is called a staff. Now, we number the spaces, right, in between the lines from the bottom to top also. So this is space number 1, space number 2, space number 3, and then space number 4. All right, 5 lines, bottom to top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 4 spaces from bottom to top, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, just as a little bit of a warning, the staff does not stop here. We just use these 5 lines and 4 spaces at the very beginning. The staff can go higher than 5, right? We can keep going up, or we can go below the staff with lines. And the same thing for spaces. We can go above space number 4 or below space number 4. But for what we need right now, we're just going to use these 5 and these 4. 5 lines and 4 spaces. Now, in order to represent music, right, because the stuff we're writing on the paper is not music, right, it's not sound. We know that music is sound. In order to represent sound, we look at the staff, and then we add notes to it, right? So just like we have line number 1, we could put a note on line number 1, right? And for right now, we're just going to use this. This is technically called a whole note, but we'll get into what that means later. But just so you know what we're talking about. So this whole note is currently located on line number 1. See how the line goes through the middle of it? This whole note is located on space number 2, right? There's a 2 written here. We put the whole note in space number 2. This whole note is written on line number 3. Now look, see, whenever I wrote it, I kind of did it too fast, and you can see how it's on the line, but it looks a little confusing. So you just want to make sure whenever you're writing it, that you make sure to split it or put it in the exact location. This whole note is on line number 4. This whole note is in space number 4, and you can track back and forth, right? So see, there's a note here, and then this number 4 is in that space. You can just see if you need to compare until you get used to it. That's what we're talking about. Now, one other thing, if we're talking about pitch, right? Pitch is the actual sound that we get. The notes, these things here, are what represent pitch, and then these numbers are just to help us understand where they are, right? So the notes are just what we use to help us understand what pitch to play on the instrument. And the pitch, this word right here, P-I-T-C-H, the E-S just makes it plural, so multiple pitches. The pitch is the sound that we hear. So, for example, this whole note right here on line number 1 again represents a certain pitch. And for us, although we don't know it yet, this note is an E, right, if we're talking about treble clef. So this is a pitch. Now, what we do need to understand is that as we move higher on the staff, and remember, this is called a staff, these 5 lines and 4 spaces. As we move higher on the staff, the pitch sounds higher. So that means this pitch right here sounds higher than this pitch, right? So if we were just labeling it and we need to know if it's higher or lower, we might say something like this. We could put an H to represent that this second note, right, because the note is representing the pitch, this second note is higher than this first one. If I write this note between note number 2 and note number 3, this one is lower, right? So between those two, the second one's higher. Between these two, the second one is lower. Make sense? So if I add a note up here, this note or this pitch sounds higher than this pitch. Between these two, this pitch sounds lower than this one. All right, so we can go through and kind of know high and low and that kind of thing. So what we're going to do next, I'm going to put a sheet of paper on here just as a practice exercise. I'm going to pause the video real quick, let you go through them, and of course you should pause. So let's take it back. I'm not going to pause it. You pause the video right here, go through the exercises, and then I'll come back and I'll go through them with you. Right, so 4 exercises, 1, 2, 3, 4. The first one's really easy. You're just drawing the staff and then read through them. So go ahead and pause your video, work through them by yourself. You might need a separate sheet of paper, draw the staff just like I was, and then we'll come back and do them together. Okay, here is exercise number 1. It says to draw a staff by connecting the dots. Use a ruler, straight edge, number the lines and the spaces from low to high. So all we're doing here is we're drawing a line between the 2 dots to create a staff. It's not going to be perfect. That's okay. Just do your best, right? So top line, second line, third, fourth, and fifth. Now we drew the 5 lines, but the last part of the directions say to then number the spaces, number the lines, and then the spaces from low to high. So we know how to do that because of something we did earlier in the video. Line number 1 is on the bottom, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's the 5 lines from bottom to top. And then the 4 spaces, 1 goes in the bottom space, 2, 3, and 4. 5 lines and 4 spaces. Excellent. Number 2, on the staff, mark an X in the following locations. So line number 3, we can use what we just drew up here to track back if we need to, so we count up. Here's line 1, here's line 2, and then line 3 is where they put the X. So that's our example. Space number 2, space number 1, space number 2, put an X there. Alright, line number 1, the very bottom line. Space number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And of course, this is for your practice, so if you need to add dots like I did here, you can kind of see them on the video. If you need to add dots, feel free to add the dots. Line number 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Top line. Space number 1, it's bottom, right? Line number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right there. Space number 3, 1, 2, 3. And then line number 2, 1, 2. There we go. Alright. Now, question 3. Write the notes like this, and I want you to use that shape on the following lines and spaces. So the same thing as number 2, except instead of X's, we're using this whole note like we talked about from the lesson. So space number 4, you just count. Line number 1 is the bottom line, so we add our whole notes. Space number 2, whole notes. Line 3, whole notes. Space 1, whole notes. Line 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the top line. Space 3, 1, 2, 3. Line 2, 1, 2. And then line 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, last question for right now. Indicate whether the second note is higher or lower than the first notes by using an H for higher or an L for lower. So here's our example. They gave us 2 notes, first note and then the second note, right? and it wants to know if the pitch would sound higher for the second note. So see how it's higher on the staff? It's up higher that way, right? We would write an H for that one. Number 2, we have the first note, and then the second note is below it, so that means that this note, right, the second note sounds lower. The second note here is above the first one, so that means it's higher. H. Next one, this note here is higher than the first one, so we say higher. Right, higher on the staff. It goes up higher, closer to line 5, right? This one here, we have line number 2, and then we have line number 1. So because this one's lower, we write an L for lower. Same thing here. Space number 4, and then line number 2. Second note is lower, so we write an L. And then here we have 2 notes. First note, second note, space 3, space 4. This one's higher, so we write an H. All right, that's the lesson. Remember, you need to stop and pause the video if you didn't understand. You can always track back to see where you missed something. No shame in that. And always refer back to these videos if you have questions. So, hope you enjoyed. We talked about the staff, notes, and pitches in this lesson. See you all later.